and they did have no buggy. They took no buggy with them in terms of that. So they were initially told that they were due to eat their food, both in terms of dinners and breakfast, at the main hotel complex. But they said that they would prefer to eat at the tapas bar, and reluctantly the hotel complex said, okay, we'll open it for you because there's a large number of you, we'll open it for you and allow you to go there. They had the facilities if they wanted to, and of course they could also have potentially used each other within the group that they were with, that one night perhaps one family drops out and they sit with all the kids. But and not everybody went. There were some of that group who did spend time and stayed at home and watched their children. But they took the decision that they were going to leave their 3 children in the apartment block on their own whilst they went to the tapas bar.
Did they ever state why they didn't take up the babysitting facility that was available?
I don't believe there was any real clarity in terms of why they did or didn't. I think they felt that it wasn't an appropriate service to do. I think there were some questions about whether or not there was that facility properly existed that night to be able to provide it. And ultimately, they didn't use it. There was one really interesting point, which is we know that in the days leading up to Madeleine's disappearance, that Sean and Annalise were heard to cry because a upstairs neighbour heard that. What we also know, and in an age-appropriate way, is that on the morning of the disappearance, Madeleine said to Jerry and Kate that she was woken last night by Sean and Annalise. Where were they? Because she'd obviously gone to check to see where Mum and Dad was, and they weren't there. In which case, Jerry and Kate, again age-appropriately, said to Madeleine, well, we were only in the tapas bar across the way. And I think that is a really, really significant point, and I'm sure you'll want me to explain later why. But that is really, really significant. On the morning of Madeleine's disappearance, she said to her parents, where were you last night when Sean and Annalise woke me up?
Perhaps you could expand on that now then.
Well, why that's really significant is that means that Madeleine is fully aware of where Jerry and Kate are. And in order for her to go and talk to Mum and Dad, she would have to have left the apartment block via the back door, gone on to the public road path, and then back in again some 50 yards down the road. So what that means is that in order for her to go and speak to Mum and Dad, she is out of the complex, she is in the public domain, and therefore if anybody had wanted to snatch her, to abduct her, the access was there. And there is only 2 elements that are crucial that exist within regards to the abduction of children. There are 3 elements, but the 2 are the most important. That is access, opportunity, and motivation. Now, motivation is different to everybody. If it's in relation to the abduction of a child, it may well be sexual, it may well be power, control, all of those issues. But actually, motivation from an investigator's point of view doesn't help you when you're starting to investigate. Yes, down the road, once you've caught your offender, it can be very interesting to find out where the motivation sits. But at the initial period of any investigation, it's about access and opportunity. What is the access in order to commit your crime, and what is the opportunity? Okay, so let's look at both of those. In order for her to be abducted, she goes out of the apartment block and onto a public road. Offenders, where the child is unknown to them, it is almost unheard of that they will go into an apartment block and abduct a child. It is almost unheard of. It's certainly never happened in the UK, and it's very rare to have happened around the world. So you could almost with certainty rule out that the offender entered the apartment to abduct her. But she is now on the public road. And what we do know from experience in relation to child abductions is that they are predatory and they are opportunistic. And by that, I mean they're not planned in terms of who the victim is. Yes, they plan to abduct a child, but not a specific child. And when we look at 2 of the most high profile cases, and that is Jeanette Tate in 1978 in the West Country, and Sarah Payne in relation to in Surrey in Roy Whiting. So what happens is Roy Whiting, a known abductor, he'd abducted a child previously, had a custodial sentence but was released. That morning, he set out to abduct a child, not Sarah Payne. He had no idea who he was going to abduct. He drives down to the south of England, and whilst he is there, he is beside a field and he sees Sarah Payne. Now, Sarah Payne happened to be walking with her parents and her brother. Sarah walks some distance away from her parents and brother through a hole in the fence, and Roy Whiting abducts her. Now, the point to which her brother appears through this hole in the fence that Sarah just walked through, he sees the back of a white van disappear. Nothing else, sees the back of a white van. That white van belonged to Roy Whiting. And in fact, it was such a significant sighting that it enabled the police very quickly to get onto Roy Whiting as being a suspect. And I know that because very shortly after Sarah Payne's disappearance, when I got back to work, I was initially on leave. And when I went back to work, which was probably about 3 or 4 days later, I joined the task force to look for the the Surrey element of the potential offenders. We looked at 2 key targets, and one of those key targets we were told about was Roy Whiting. And the police had him under their sights right from the very early days. We looked at another possible suspect. So they had him, and Roy Whiting didn't set out to abduct Sarah Payne. She just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And then look at Jeanette Tate. Jeanette Tate is out delivering newspapers with some friends. She cycles down a hill, and when she gets to the bottom of the hill, she is abducted. A short distance behind her are her friends. And by the time they get over the top of the hill and get to the bottom of it, she's gone. Her bike is on the ground and she has vanished. Her body has never been found. But Robert Black is certainly, I believe, he's now dead, is what was the person that abducted her and subsequently killed her. It fits his MO to an absolute T. He was never brought to justice. But the point being is that she was just a matter of seconds away from her friends. And significantly, she was never targeted that day. That wasn't a time that you could be sure that she'd be in that route in any way at all. So they're opportunistic. And I believe that's exactly what happened with Madeleine. Now, I've written about it. It's had worldwide coverage, my opinion, in relation to this. Not everyone agrees. There'll be some that go, that makes a lot of sense. But there'll be a lot of people, of course, who are absolutely divided in that. They say, no, that's not possible in any way at all. The reality, of course, is nobody other than the offender or whoever the offender or offenders have spoken to knows what happened to Madeleine. And the reality is, of course, I don't know more than anybody else, other than I've done a very extensive review. I've been to the location. I've looked at and read all the evidence. I've spoken to all the key people involved in that. So in terms of being informed, I'm probably one of the most informed people in regards to what I believe happened to Madeleine McCann.
So you said that the police turned the sights on the parents, and working in law enforcement yourself, isn't that a natural thing to do, to suspect the immediate family members?
Absolutely, but they did it the wrong way round. They should have been right under the spotlight from day one. It's a terminology we use in the police. It's clear the ground from under your feet. They are the prime suspects. What we know in relation to the certainly offences against children and offences in relation to abduction or murder is that it is normally someone known to the child. You know, stranger abductions, murders of children are very, very rare. And so when it does occur, the first place you look is the relatives, the family. They are your initial target. To go looking for an abductor to begin with is absolutely the wrong way, because that's the hardest thing to prove. You know, how do you start to look for an abductor? You need to build all the evidence up. You need to get everything in, all your ducks in line, and hope that they do line up. Whereas, of course, in relation to family members, we know statistically and we know evidentially that it is normally a family member who is involved in a case against a child, or certainly someone known to the child.
So what mistakes did the police make?
Well, they went after looking for an offender. They looking for a stranger, a stranger, which is such a difficult thing to do. And I think as a result of that, they failed to do some of the really basics, which was to secure evidence at the crime scene. That crime scene was walked upon. There was a lot of cross-contamination in that crime scene. They failed to properly secure evidence in relation to Jerry and Kate, sat down really early on and got real detail from them. They failed to preserve the external crime scene. I made comments on day 3 or day 4 that if you wanted to, you could just simply walk up the back steps of the door, back steps into the apartment. There was nobody on those steps in any way at all. There was no police there, other regular presence outside the property. and also the roads. The roads weren't secured, and I know the roads weren't secured in the hours after this case came out, because I covered it. As I said, I went over there within 72 hours for Sky News, and it just so happened that whilst I was in my hotel room, and there was some coverage that I was going over there, and in my hotel room, the police officer, retired ex-police officer, found out I was staying, and left a message actually on my hotel room and said, "Mark, very strange. Obviously, I now live out here. You probably don't know that." And I'd worked with her previously when I did a massive investigation. She came on came and worked with me on it.
When we wake up in the morning, we get out of bed and we start our day with Coro snacks. Coro is a healthy snacks brand focusing on bringing additive-free, natural ingredients to their customers with fair prices in bulk packaging. They have everything from nut butters to free from baking ingredients to cooking essentials and, of course, the snacks. Oh, these Syrian pumpkin seeds from Coro are amazing. I have them on my cheese on toast every morning. You've been getting into them, Jen?
Yes, and all the health benefits it brings.
Look at that.
It's quite a lot. Quite a lot going on.
Lashings of them.
Right. Pop this in the oven then.
So what makes Coro special in comparison to others? Coro cares about sustainability. Their bulk packs save on packaging material compared to small single packs. For a 5% discount on Coro's products, use the code TRUECRIME with no space in between true and crime. The link to Coro's online shop is in the description box on YouTube. Thanks for supporting our sponsor.
And I said she said, "Give me a ring. I can tell you some really interesting stuff." So I phoned her up. I said, "Mark, let me tell you something fascinating." The day after, so Madeleine goes missing, it hits the national headlines the following morning. That morning, I went down there with my husband, and we said we better take our passports down with us, because it's a big story, we might get stopped and prove who we are. So we walked down there, and we walked past the apartment, and I did not see a police officer at all. And at no stage were they doing any hand-to-hand forensic searching on their hands, on their knees, none of that. And in fact, we also were able to establish that at no stage in those early days did they do any proper house-to-house. Now, that's really important, because it's a very transient community. And by that, I mean people coming and going from different countries, because there's lots of holiday lets there. So you might be there for a week and then disappear. And you'll be perhaps even from another country that isn't following the story, particularly within the first week or so. So there were people that undoubtedly were missed by the time they did finally get their act together and start to do some house-to-house. So that was missed. There was a huge ball dropped in relation to the media. That was a massive error on its own. But one of the crucial things is that at no stage did they actually, until we pushed them really hard, put out what Madeleine was wearing. There was very little detail came out in relation to that. Very little detail about her at all. Well, how is it that you're going to be able to identify this young person is if you're not going to give some specifics about what she was wearing, those types of elements? So it was really poorly handled, and none more so than the first press conference. I mean, I went to the first press conference, and I refer to it now as a Joe 90 moment. I talk about it in my Hunting Killers book, but it's like a Joe 90 moment where I basically say, on this top desk was the Navy, the Army, and the police. The police officer actually wasn't in uniform, but the Army and the Navy guy were. They talked about checking the water, checking land. And one of the things that was very interesting in this press conference, it was all conducted in Portuguese. And it wasn't until a Sun journalist who became very angry and said, "Look, this is a British child. You need to answer some British questions." And rightly so, got some kind of response. But there was the arrogance that sat behind it. And I always say to police forces, and it frustrates me to such a degree, is that when you want to give a press conference, and you call a press conference for 3:00, unless there is a developing story, unless there's something really developing within it, don't keep the press waiting. Get that story out there, do your bit, and then move on. And we saw it recently with Nicola Bulley. There was some 40-minute delay for press conference, not because some new information came in, just because sometimes these police officers think, "Do you know what? I'll just keep the media waiting." The media are such an important role when it comes to murder investigations, missing persons, because the public are the eyes and the ears of the police. They find the jigsaw pieces. It's the police then that have to put the puzzle together. So the media play an absolutely vital role. Whatever people's view of the media is, when it comes to major investigations, they are absolutely central. And it's really important that the police work with the media. But sometimes there's this real arrogance, well, we don't need them, we'll do it ourselves. That's when it goes wrong. And actually, if you compare two really significant cases about media, you look at Constantine, where the baby was found in Brighton, which was a coordinated approach between the Metropolitan Police and Sussex Police. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. They were spot on the way they were delivering aspects through the media. They were very clear, they were concise, and very professional. Compare that to Nicola Bulley's case with the Lancashire Police, which was pretty farcical most of the time. They really didn't know what they were doing. They were passing out inaccurate information. They were passed out information which I believe wasn't appropriate to pass out. The whole media management, and indeed I spoke to one of their senior press officers, and he accepted. He said, "Mark, we've heard everything you've been saying, and I think you make some really valid points. We're trying to get it better." And it's like, well, hang on a minute. You've been in the police service, or the police service has been around for a very long time. This isn't the first time you've had to deal with a major case. So you shouldn't be learning now. You should have learned how to do it many times. But the Portuguese were utterly out of their depth. And we went to the first press conference, which was called, I don't know, some 3 or 4 days afterwards. And it was called in the town centre. And what happened is that the media crews now were quite considerable. And the press officer said, what we need to do is we're going to come out the police steps and we're going to do a press conference on the police steps. I remember saying to the press officer, so, well, you're going to shut the road off, because actually the front door of the police station was then led you onto a small path, and then there was the road crossing over to the town hall centre and the centre area. And she said, oh, yeah. I said, if you do that and you don't shut the road, I said, the press are just going to walk in and sit in the road. I said, do you realise how many press there are here? And I don't think they really understood that. They then opened up the village hall, and that's when the first press conference happened. And it was the first press conference that was broadcast live. And I remember standing there listening to it whilst the details were given out. But they had no idea. In those days, it was quite clear that they had no idea what could have happened to Madeleine. They had initially didn't focus straight away on Jerry and Kate, but then within days that kind of started to change. Gonzalo Amaral took over, and he just then, as we now know, became almost utterly fixated on Jerry and Kate as being the prime suspects in the disappearance.
So the parents have been criticised about the way they reacted in the aftermath, in the immediate days. Can you predict how someone is going to behave when they're in such a state of shock?
No, I mean, that's a really important point, Sean, is because public have tried to make their assessment in terms of whether or not Jerry and Kate are guilty on the way that they've behaved. Stress, anxiety, that creates all kinds of different responses from different people. Crisis results in different responses. If you put 4 people in a room and gave them the same crisis, you could say with certainty that not all 4 would respond in the same way. We all respond in different ways, using our own experience, using the anxieties and the pressures that we're currently facing externally, and bring them to whatever is facing us now. So no, people respond in many, many different ways. And I think it was very easy, of course, for the public to turn around and go, well, because they've done it like this, Kate went and played tennis or went for a run. Jerry went and played tennis. Didn't wash the cuddle cat. What's all that all about? This is people behaving in a way that they are not used to. When you are at the heart of a story, and a story as big as this was, with the world's media there is no right way to act. People react in all kinds of different ways, and Jerry and Kate did. Their biggest mistake, and I've been very outspoken about this, their biggest mistake was to say on that night that we did what most parents would do, which was to leave our child and go and eat at a restaurant. That was wrong, because they didn't have line of sight. They weren't in control of the children whilst they were there. And yes, they are right in a way that there will be many people that have done it and may well have done it on that night. But they then have to live with the consequences of their actions. That night, they should never have left Sean, Annalise or Madeleine in that apartment. In fact, had they not have left them in that apartment that night, the following day, they would all have been there. We don't know what happened, what could have happened in the days afterwards, years afterwards. But that following morning, Madeleine would have been there. So they have to live with the consequences of that. And I think one of the major problems I've had with them is that failing to acknowledge that actually, do you know what? We made the mistake here. We shouldn't have left her there. And as a result of that, we've got to live with the consequences for the rest of our life.
Why and when was a cadaver dog brought in, and what were the results?
So a cadaver dog was brought in. I'm not sure the exact period of time, but the cadaver dog was brought in, a British cadaver dog. Cadaver dogs have a value, but they are only as good as the intelligence given to them, but also they have to be tempered with all the other knowledge known around them. And one of the major problems with the cadaver dog, or with any dog, is you can't ask them a question. You can't get evidence from them. You can't put them in the witness box. So you have to go and entirely reliant on how good their training is and what they are giving indications to. And effectively, the cadaver dog gave what the police believed were two really significant identifications. That's firstly in the apartment. There was a consideration that that had given rise to some evidence, and then in the back car of a hired car that Jerry and Kate had. Now, addressing both of those in turn, the DNA analysis that they say resulted, or sorry, the indication from the cadaver dog within the apartment, Gonzalo Amaro is saying, and this is his narrative, he's never given me an interview. He refuses to give me an interview. And in fact, the only times that I potentially got somewhere to him, he wanted such a massive, massive figure, financial figure, to talk to me. It was never, ever going to happen. And of course, I was going to give him a pretty hard time to explain himself. He's never, ever properly given that. And all the interviews I've seen of Gonzalo Amaral, he has not properly addressed or answered any of those. He's very selective in terms of what he does. But the point being, so Gonzalo Amaral is convinced that Madeleine died in that apartment. He comes up with a number of different theories, but the one that I've seen given the most is that he believes she fell off the back of the settee and smashed her head and died. There's other suggestions that she'd been drugged up on cowpole, etc. Utter rubbish. Firstly, you'd have to give enough cowpole to knock them out, as in not gain consciousness. They'd be sick. And I know that because I phoned up the poisons unit at Guy's Hospital, who, if you get some kind of poisoning or something like that, they've got a dedicated unit that can give you a response to all the things that people can swallow, that can eat. And they said, no, she would have been violently sick. So there's no evidence of sick in that property at all. They say there was some blood spatter there. And so none of that stacks up, because if she had fallen off the back of the settee, the presumption then from Gonzalo Amaral is that they then got rid of her body. All right. How one did they just decide to think, she's died, we're now going to go and dump her body and get rid of her? These are people who loved her. That makes no sense at all. And they're very clever people, so they could quite easily have said, well, she fell off the back of the settee, and ridden that. They didn't. Their reaction is to go and hide her body. So that makes no sense, first of all. He doesn't give an explanation as to why he believes that, because there's no basis of that. But this plays into the second part, and the second part is that the cadaver dogs apparently indicated, and they do indicate, but this is the basis of where they say the evidence indicated that there was Madeleine's DNA or traces in the back of a hire car. Now, the significance of this hire car is hired in order to move stuff out of the apartment that they had into a different apartment, and therefore Madeleine's items would have been in that car, particularly in the boot of that car where the indication was given. So there's no science there. There's no forensic continuity, because what they were saying is, well, hang on a minute, how is it that her identification could be in the back of this car when Madeleine's already missing? There's been no crossover because a car hire wasn't hired until after Madeleine was missing. What they failed to acknowledge properly is, well, hang on a minute, all of her property's gone in that car. And therefore, there's quite easily a cross-contamination aspect of that. But then take that one step further. So if Gonzalo Amaral believes that Madeleine was fell off the back of the settee, died, and then they disposed of her body, but what I can see Gonzalo Amaral seems to be saying, It's not very clear what he says. Yeah, I think there's quite a bit of confusion there. But the aspects of it okay, break that down and then say to yourself, so where was she between the period of time of her going missing on the 3rd of May and the hire car, which was, and I can't remember the figures off my head, it's something like about 12 to 14 days. Where was she in that period of time? Because during that period of time, the media, the police were absolutely everywhere. There was no way that Jerry and Kate could do anything without falling under the public spotlight. There's no way to do anything. So the suggestion that Madeleine was kept for a period of time, then she was put in the back of the car, which was why the cadaver dogs gave an indication, and then go and dispose of elsewhere, is absolutely ridiculous. It makes no sense. If you apply logic to it, and sadly there's a lot of people involved in Madeleine McCann who don't see logic, but if you apply logic to it, it tells you, well, it doesn't make any sense, because where was her body for that period of time, then to be dug up or got under the biggest spotlight? There were more spotlight then, not at the time when she went missing, but on that time, there was, it was a good hour and a half after she's last seen, where if they'd wanted to do that, they could have got rid of her body at that stage when there was nobody around. To suggest that they went at the height of the publicity, under the greatest scrutiny, got her body, put it in the back of the car, a hire car that the police knew they had, and then disposed of her body, makes absolutely no sense at all.
And he's saying the car was hired after she went missing to move stuff out of the apartment.
Well, it was moved not just to move stuff out of the apartment, because it was moved for them to get about, but it did get used to move stuff out of the apartment.
But it was hired after she'd gone missing.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, and then there's all these theories that they got rid of the body, and it's not possible, is it? I mean,
it makes no sense. It makes absolutely no sense. If you stay with Gonzalo Amarel's theory, which is, as I understand it, and I'd love him to correct me or tell me where his proper theory comes from, because it makes no sense, is that she fell off the back of the chair, and people suggesting that she was she was drugged. None of that makes any sense at all, because if you follow it all through, they all fall down. Cowpole, no. Wouldn't have lost consciousness, would have been sick. Sick in the apartment, no. Get rid of a body is a natural reaction, having seen your child be killed, to just dispose of a body. They're two educated people, very educated people. They'll just simply be able to say, well, no, this is what happened. And they're highly trained in the medical profession. They could have done all kinds of things to help her recover, whatever that was. So none of that makes sense. And then to get rid of her body, or to move her body from wherever it was, under the greatest spotlight that they were. At that stage, they actually had their phones being tapped as well by the Portuguese police, to not just tapped, but monitored as to where they were going. So they were doing cell pattern analysis as well, to be able to show where Jerry and Kate were at any given time. And so when you look at all of that, it makes absolutely no sense that they then go and get her body, put it in a hire car. They put it in their own hire car, not someone else's. Not a hire car that they got for a day and got rid of, but they put in a hire car that they kept that whole period of time, and then go and got rid of her body. Where did they go? Oh yeah, and that period of time when they were under full surveillance. Absolutely no sense at all. And people that are convinced that they were involved, I'd ask them to hang a minute, just think to yourself, run through the narrative that you think has happened, and then step back from it in an objective way, not a subjective way, in an objective way, and say, is that really possible? What is it that throws the ointment into that? And when you do that, your story falls apart. And I'm sure, listen, Sean, I've come on yours. You've got a huge following. You're brilliant at what you do. You've got a huge following. I will receive hate for this. I will receive people who will be venomous to me. I've had a petrol bomb sent to me about work I've done. I've had death threats. I've had child abuse material sent to me. After I exposed Savile, someone sent me child abuse material and says, see if you can catch me. I got arrested by the police 2 days ago. They didn't get this disc. This is what I was up to. And there was a picture of him abusing a very young child. He was managed to be tracked down to an internet cafe in North London, but unfortunately the CCTV wasn't recording. I didn't have the time at that period of time to go and try and do my own investigation, so I left it to the police and it drew back. But yeah, there were people who hate me as a result. It's absolutely, this is the most, and I said this right at the very beginning, this is the most divided case that I have ever been aware of. I mean, when this first happened, Philip Schofield, I'd sit with Philip on the settee and we'd do an article about it. And Philip would say to me, he said, we're in for it now. And we would both be inundated with, vitriol from people about it. It is a huge dividing story.
Mark, did any evidence ever come to light that the parents were in possession of sedatives?
I think they had Calpol. I think they definitely had Calpol, but there was no other sedatives that were considered to have been in a position that they could have used. They were doctors, and as a result of that, they definitely had medication on them. But it wasn't a medication that was of any value that could have been used to drug them in any way at all. Calpol, yeah, definitely. But Calpol is brilliant. You ask any parent, Calpol is brilliant, but it's not something that is going to to kill you. It's going to make you very, very poorly if you take an awful lot of it. And I watched someone on the other day. I won't say his name, but this guy is a former police officer, and he was on there saying Jerry and Kate murdered. I mean, they should sue him. They should sue the pants off him. But he was saying this, and then he said, they're both anaesthetists, and it's like, I don't know if you know what you're talking about. They're both trained medical practitioners. He's I think he's a cardiologist, and she is a GP. It's like, well, neither of them are anaesthetists at all. Yes, they've got that knowledge in terms of every medical practitioner, but they're not practicing anaesthetists. And there's just so much misinformation around there. Limited amount. I mean, people say to me, Mark, read the PJ files. Do you know what? I read the PJ files probably before most people did. I had the whole files translated. I read every single word of those PJ files. And at no stage is there any evidence at all. And I tell you what, if there was, I'd be out there spoken, and I've been very clearly. And Jerry Kate don't agree with all my theories at all. They don't agree with my theory that Madeleine walked out looking for them. Now, it doesn't look good for them. They don't agree with that. But, absolutely, and I've been totally clear on this, Jerry and Kate should never have left Madeleine that night. But Jerry and Kate have got nothing to do with her disappearance.
So what is the purpose of Calpol, and why did they have it?
Well, it keeps children quiet. It enables them to sleep, particularly if children are teething, or perhaps they're going through not sleeping very well. Calpol's really good, and it's kind of like every parent's jelly baby. It's just brilliant if you like jelly babies. But it's great. It's got a great taste to it. Kids love it, and it enables them to be relaxed. People don't die from Calpol. I mean, I don't know, but I don't think you'll find a case of a child being killed by Calpol.
All right, so you said the parents were on the suspect list in the early days. Who else was on the suspect list? Were any arrests made in the early days? Any interrogations?
Yeah, so there was Robert Murat. Robert Murat was an individual who was a local. He lived around the corner. He became a translator. He was a British guy. He put himself into the frame to help translate. And actually, he was put in the frame by one of the reporters from the newspapers who said, look, this man suddenly ingratiated himself into the scene. We think he may well have been involved. And I think people were still thinking about Ian Huntley and some of the other cases that have been around where offenders will often put themselves back into the crime scene. And we know that happens. Anyway, so Murat became a target, really. And the police then started to look at him. They looked at his associates, and there was a couple of associates of his that were also arrested and interviewed. I remember speaking to Murat's solicitor, who was a really nice guy. And it was very clear that actually that whole process of Murat had no credence to it. Yes, they were following up on a line of inquiry given to them by the media, and it was right to do that. You should never close down the lines of inquiry, particularly so early on in the investigation. But Murat had nothing to do with it, and of course Murat then subsequently sued. I don't know how many newspapers for the lies and things that came out. I mean, the problem with a story like this, it was so big, is that you then get fed stories in a certain way in newspapers. As I said, the Portuguese press were effectively peddling the story of the PJ, who were leaking story to them all the time. And then the British media then started to follow tune in terms of what they wanted to do, which, at one stage was really single Murat out. But we saw that in relation to Joanna Yates, Joanna Yates went missing in Bristol, and as a result of the media put, I think the guy's name was Jeffries, put him into the frame. It's like the odd guy, but put him into the frame. All kinds of accusations made to him because that was the media narrative they were peddling, and he was absolutely innocent, had nothing to do with it at all. And so, very often there are these people who get pulled into a situation just by their very nature of being there, and perhaps sometimes being slightly odd.
Boo Radley. So the German suspect, how did he come into the picture?
So the German suspect, this is something that is obviously much more recent, and this is a guy called Christian B. His surname by most isn't used, but Christian B. He was an individual, or he is an individual who has a long history of sexual offences against children, and he came out of the blue, really, because what happened is the German authorities were investigating Christian Bruckner for some period of time for offences against children. And they had what they thought was a major breakthrough because they were investigating a case. The Portuguese had closed a lady at an apartment block in Praia da Luz, and the case had been dealt with and looked at by the Portuguese, and they found no evidence to support in any way at all, and they closed the case. The authorities in Germany asked to look at the case and found a piece of evidence. Now, I don't know the basis of that, but the Portuguese never found the evidence, and the Germans did find the evidence. And the Germans hate Christian B. There's no doubt about that. Certainly the prosecutor does. Anyway, they find this piece of evidence, and subsequently he gets convicted for this. He always maintains his innocence. And at that point, they do some further examination, and some people crawl out the woodwork, old acquaintances of him who don't like Christian B. And then there became this story that these video cassettes existed of him to other people. And then as a result of that, they then started to do some investigations. And then the prosecutor comes out one day and says, absolutely forthright, that he believes that, or I don't think it's even believed, but I'll give him the benefit of the doubt, Madeleine is dead, has been murdered, and Christian Bruckner is responsible. And goes further than that and says that on the day of the disappearance, Christian Bruckner was using a phone outside the apartment on the day that she was missing, and in fact, hours before she went missing. And they can categorically link that phone to him. And so that's the narrative, is that Christian Bruckner on the day outside the apartment using a phone that was picked up by a cell tower by the apartment, and therefore, because of his previous in relation to the abduction of children and going into a house and raping an older person, he is the killer. And that was the narrative that was fed to all the worldwide media, and this picked up massive, massive attention. And I remember listening to it and thinking, really? Yeah, he's not a nice bloke, because it was pretty much laid in terms of what his previous convictions were. But did he really get involved with that? Anyway, I thought, I'm going to do some digging around this. And very quickly, I established that actually the telephone that was used outside the apartment, the number that was used, was being used by a German. I had a network of individuals who contacted me who were kind of like online vigilantes in the network for Germany. And they told me that telephone number was being used by an individual who had gone into some number of forums, chat rooms, in relation to Germany, and was looking for children. So that was really positive in terms of, okay, so we've got a link of a phone number. And then we started to dig that further and further and further. And one of the major problems we then identified, and it was a massive, massive breakthrough. I can't tell you exactly how we got to that breakthrough because I have to protect the person who was an absolutely 100% legitimate source. And I'm talking about an authority position. We found out that telephone number that is alleged to be used by Christian Bruckner on the day and the hours prior to Madeleine's disappearance was actually not his phone. It was belonging to somebody else he knew, and it was not his phone. We were able to validate that 100%, that it was being used by somebody else, and we identified who that person was. We then went further with that, and we were then able to do some cell site analysis. Cell site analysis has been given to us by the Portuguese authorities with certainty to say he was outside the apartment at that time. we did some very detailed cell site analysis, and we're able to say there's absolutely no way at all you could pinpoint him to being outside of the apartment. So much so he could be up to 21 miles away. This is huge distance away. And so, sorry, 8 kilometers away. Yeah, 8 kilometers away, I think it is. But some massive distance away from the apartment. And so there's no way. So I confronted the prosecutor. I made a program last year, and actually it's just come out on Paramount. Madeleine McCann, I think you can still see it on Channel 5, which is a cut down version of our 3 hours on Paramount. And that program goes into absolute detail